What is up, everybody? Today we're going to be talking about the iOS job interview process. If you followed along with the vlogs, you know that I just recently went to an event a couple days ago at Lyft, all about cracking the coding interview and job interviews. So that whole process is kind of top of mind for me right now, and it's got me really thinking about when I go back out at the beginning of 2018 to apply to all these big companies, how I'm going to go about that. So it's kind of fresh in my mind, so I wanted to talk to you guys about that today. While I'm waiting for people to get in here, give you a quick agenda of what we're going to talk about. I'm going to talk about keeping these live streams fresh. Got a little feedback on the live streams, and I agreed with it. So talk about keeping the questions themed. I'm going to say this a lot throughout this live stream just to remind people, but keep your questions themed to iOS jobs in general, whether that's interview process, how to get them, just a job themed question. If you're going to ask a question that's not related to jobs, I'm probably not going to answer it, just to keep this on task and on topic, because some of the feedback I got was that a lot of the questions are getting repetitive, because not everybody can make every live stream. So, the same questions get asked over and over again. So we're going to try to keep this fresh for people that keep coming back each week. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about a little bit before we dive into the job stuff. I kind of jumped ahead. I'm going to give a channel update, mentoring update, and then I'll start answering the job Q&As. Like I said, I heard feedback that the live streams were getting a little repetitive and stale, which I agreed with, because like I said, I answer a lot of the same questions. So again, I'm going to keep saying this as more people come in. What's up, Michael? Keep your questions, and while I'm talking about the job stuff, go ahead and ask questions, but keep your questions themed to job-related questions. Those are the only ones I'm going to answer. Unless if you super chat, I'll answer your question, but just the normal questions, I'll just keep it to job-related questions. And if I run out of job-related questions, then I'll go back and answer some of the random ones. But try to keep it themed to the jobs. Let me check my notes here. Oh yeah, and as far as the live stream, we're going to try and switch up the format. So every other week, I'm going to do something like this where I talk about a theme for 5 to 7 minutes and then do Q&A. And then every other week, I think I'm going to mix in like some live coding or something different just to keep the live streams fresh. Because like I said, I agree they are getting a little stale. So if you guys have suggestions on some stuff that you'd like to see in the live streams, I'd love to hear it either now in the chat or if you're watching the replay, go ahead and leave a comment. Just something to keep the live streams interesting. Like I said, live coding, stuff like that. So, all right, that's it for the live stream. Let's dive into the job stuff. So, like I mentioned earlier before a lot of you got here, as you may know, I just did a cracking the coding interview event at the Lyft offices. Lyft is the ride-sharing company here in San Francisco, and it really got me thinking about the job search again. Not that I'm going to quit contracting and go look for jobs, although that is my plan at the beginning of 2018. Finish out this year contracting and then make the rounds at Lyft, Facebook, all the major companies here in Silicon Valley. So that is the plan. And going to that event kind of got me thinking about the job process again, and maybe even starting to prepare, even though it's 5-6 months away. But that's kind of what it takes when you're going to these interviews. When you're interviewing at these top companies, because they're hard to get into. So the more prep, the better. So let me talk about actually what goes on in the job process. It's usually a 3 to 4 step process. For those that haven't done an iOS job interview, hopefully this will be, interesting and you'll get some insight. So the very first step is the recruiter call. Now, this is usually a 30-minute call. Now, how do you get these calls? Usually for me, it's incoming on LinkedIn. A recruiter will say, hey, I have a job opportunity. Do you have time to chat? If I'm interested, I'll say, yeah, sure. And it's usually a quick 15 to 30-minute chat. The ones that I've gotten where I reached out to people have been on Twitter. This kind of goes back to what I always preach about having an online presence. You can't just spam developers that work at a company you want to work at on Twitter that they've never heard of you. It's nice to get involved in Twitter, so they've seen your name in the conversations around iOS. Maybe you've built some rapport, built a relationship with them a little bit, or just having an online presence. So when they click on your Twitter profile, like for example mine, they see my YouTube page. And not many developers have a YouTube page, so that stands out. And they can see everything I talk about. Or if you have a blog, or link to your LinkedIn or something, just have some online presence for them to check out, so you're just not some random person spamming them, asking them to pass your resume along. That's not a good look. So that's how I got my recruiter calls. And then, like I said, it's just basically 15 to 30 minutes of getting to know you, making sure you're not crazy. Sometimes the recruiter calls have like a very 1 to 2 or 3 very basic, iOS or developer questions. So yeah, it's not going to be, when you do the recruiter calls, don't expect to like have to show off your knowledge. Just kind of be personable, be likable, show a good attitude, and you'll usually make it past that recruiter call. After the recruiter call, it can go one of two ways. Sometimes you get a take-home project, which I like it when that happens because that gives me time to sit and think and actually build a really good project. And those projects can range from anything, just building one small feature from their existing app, or building like a smaller version of their app, but they usually contain all of the basic stuff that iOS developers need to do, which is, like building a table view, the network call, hitting an API, getting the JSON back, parsing out that JSON, and showing that data in a table view. Usually does something like that, or authenticating with login and building a UI. So the take-home projects are nice because it gives them, they usually take a couple hours to do. So some people some people don't like that. Like, why do I have to spend 3 or 4 hours on this, for this job interview that I'm probably not even going to get? It's kind of the attitude a lot of people have. But I like them. I mean, it gives me a chance to learn something. Sorry, I'm getting distracted by some of the chats. I'll come back and catch up. I got about a couple more minutes left of this, then I'll catch up on the chat. So yeah, I like the take-home projects, but I would say 20% of the interviews I did had take-home projects, so it's not super common. And actually, let me give some context real quick. I forgot to do that at the beginning. In early 2017, for those that haven't been following along, I basically made the rounds to almost every major company here in Silicon Valley interviewing. And that was after I had spent 1.5 years at my first startup job. And to be honest with you, I thought I was better than I was. So that first startup job was a small startup. It was a pretty simple app. We weren't doing anything terribly complicated. So I guess maybe I was overconfident in my developer abilities. And then when I went out to interview at Facebook, Yelp, Airbnb, like the biggest names out here, I basically got my ass kicked, to be honest with you. It was a rude awakening. Like, oh, this is how it really is. Okay, this is where I need to step my game up to be. And I didn't know where that line was before, but so basically when I went out in the beginning of 2017, it didn't go very well. I mean, I made about 7 or 8 final interviews, so it didn't go like horrible, but yeah, I was definitely a rude awakening. And then another lesson learned that I mentioned in my vlog, my top 2 on the list when I went out in 2017 were Lyft and Facebook, and those were the very first interviews I did. That's a mistake, because by the end of the process, and this was like a 2-month process, I was like an interview pro. I was like really good at interviews. However, these were like kind of the companies at the end of my list. I should have flipped that, done the companies at the end of the list first. By the time I got to Facebook and Lyft, I was like an interview pro. That's what I would recommend to you guys. Okay, so that's a little bit of context on where I'm coming from. I did probably about 20 to 30 interviews that went to the 1-hour phone screen or to the final interview. So got a lot of interview experience here in Silicon Valley. So that's just some context on where I'm coming from with this. Okay, back to the process. We have the recruiter call. You're most likely going to pass that. Then you have the take-home test. You should pass that because you get a lot of time to work on it, unless you just blow it off and only put like no effort into it. After that is the 1-hour technical phone screen. Now, this is when you on Skype, Google Hangouts, whatever, and you're usually sharing your screen with the interviewer, and they'll have you code up a problem. Now, it was about a 50-50 mix on the problems being like computer science problems, just solve this algorithm, data structure type problem. And then the other 50% was an actual iOS problem, like, using gesture recognizers to move objects around the screen or something like that. That was solely iOS, not computer science and data structures. So it was about a 50-50 split on the 1-hour phone screen. Like I said, I probably did about 20 to 30 of those, and I made it to about 7 or 8 final interviews, just to give you a rough idea of the percentage. Now, the way I look at it is when you pass that phone screen, that's a very good sign, because when you go to the final interview, which is a good segue, that's a 4 to 6 hour interview on site. You're taking up a lot of their time. You're going to meet with 5 to 6 people, taking time out of their day. So if you pass that phone screen, consider that like a very good sign that like they're really interested in you, because they're not going to waste all that time if they're just like, oh yeah, let's just check them out, let's see. So on to the final interview. Like I mentioned, it's 4 to 6 hours all day. You're going to meet with 4 to 6 different people, and each one is about an hour typically. Now let me back up a disclaimer. This is in general. Every company does this differently. I'm not saying every company is going to do this specifically, but this is what the majority of the companies do. So anyway, during those 4 to 6 interviews, it's a bunch of different types of interviews too. So you'll have behavioral interviews, which is kind of like culture fit and just talking to you. Oftentimes that's, just going to lunch with the team and just kind of hanging out, just finding out what your hobbies are, who you are as a person. And then you'll have some design and architecture type questions, like how would you structure this code, or How would you architecture this data? Building what classes would you build and stuff like that. Sorry. And then the other 2 to 3 are typically like whiteboarding coding interviews. Now, again, some companies hate whiteboarding coding interviews, so they don't do them, but the majority of them here, at least in Silicon Valley, do them, whether you like it or not. A lot of people, don't like the whiteboarding interviews. And that was always the weakest part of my game because those are usually like computer science, data structure heavy. So, that's basically kind of the interview. And then obviously once you get past the final interview, it's either you'll get an offer or some companies will just email you, say, thanks but no thanks. Some companies were nice enough to actually give you a debrief because, like I said, you meet with 4 to 6 people and they all take notes on you, and then at the end of the day, they all meet up and talk about you, essentially. So Postmates was actually a nice one. I don't know if you guys have heard of them. They're like a delivery service. They actually did a debrief on like what each person said about me and like what I can improve on and like why I didn't get that specific job. So that was pretty cool to actually hear all that feedback. And that was good. Like, it's much better than just getting an email that says, thanks but no thanks. So kudos to Postmates for that. They were like pretty much the only company that did that, and I really appreciated that. So, okay, that's the job interview process. Again, keep your questions related to job interviews. I'm going to go back and catch up. I noticed a lot coming, so I'm going to go back and answer these. But again, keep the questions job related. Unless you super chat, I'm pretty much only going to answer those. So everybody coming in, hey, what's up, Siddharth? What's up, Dilip, Mohammed, PD the Pro? See you guys in here all the time. Appreciate it. Genghis Khan back again. Dan, NS Hippie, Georges. Sankat says, best place to learn core data. Sorry, not job related. And I think that might be a joke because I always bash on core data about how you shouldn't learn it. Hey, Michael, Samir, get through all the greetings. Ryan, Mustafa, Greg, Neil, Reed. Okay, this is kind of job related from PD the Pro. Knowing Swift Xcode only is good to apply for iOS developer. If you're an iOS developer, you pretty much, you're going to code in Xcode and Swift most of the time. Now, some of these major companies like Facebook are in Twitter. Some of these older companies are in Objective-C. So if you're going to try to apply to those companies, you may want to focus on Objective-C. But most newer startups, and even some of the older ones, are converting to Swift. Like, Swift is taking over more and more every day, obviously. So if you're just learning, I would definitely recommend learning Swift because that's where it's going. But if you're trying to get into one of those older companies, then Objective-C is going to be very valuable to you. Samir says, I'm from India. How can I get an interview from here? Any way of remote interview? They do. The big companies here do remote interviews all the time. Like I mentioned, the 1-hour phone screen is a Skype or Google Hangouts, and then if they like you and you make it past that, they'll fly you out for an interview. Or, a company like Facebook has offices all around the world, so they'll probably fly you out to one that's closer to you, maybe not the one in San Francisco, but if you make it past, they'll fly you out if you pass that remote phone screen. Sankit says, when it comes to applying jobs, does it affect if I have an app on the App Store or not? What if I have a bunch of apps on my portfolio but none on the App Store? They do like to see at least one on the App Store just to prove that you can take something from a project to, you finished it and you shipped it. Like, shipping code is what we do. It's our job. You have to ship what you build. So if you just kind of build side projects but never ship them, that's not bad, but they're going to want to see that you can actually ship something. So I would at least have one on the App Store. I'm not saying you have to have all of them on the App Store, but at least put one to prove that you can ship something. Sorry, skipping over some of the non-job questions. Sorry if you missed my intro. Let me just repeat it again. We're keeping this Q&A themed to job-related questions. So if you have a non-job related question, I'm probably just going to skip over it just to keep the live stream on track and keep it interesting. However, if you super chat, I'll go ahead and answer your question, but just keep it to job related questions. What separates junior iOS devs from senior iOS devs? This might be job related, depending on what you want to apply for. That's a very vague question and hard to answer because it's very subjective. Typically years of experience, but then again, some people accelerate through their career quicker than others, so take that with a grain of salt. But I would say years of experience. Like, typically junior devs are 0 to 2 years, 2 to 5 years, or 2 to 4 maybe, mid-level dev, and then senior dev it's like 5 and above. But again, that's very subjective and flexible. It's very hard to give a hard answer on that. What's going on, Liam? Can't show you the tatted arm. I got a hoodie on. I'd have to derobe for you guys. It looks like Avars is having problems with the stream. I haven't seen anybody else mention that, so hopefully it's going well. Nobody's mentioned it. Hey Sean, do you have a donation page? Would be nice to say thanks. Learned a lot from videos and give motivation. Thanks. Yeah, like I said, you can either super chat here in the live stream. That's a way to donate, or you can check out my Patreon page, which is. The Patreon page is more than a donation. Like, I'm actually giving stuff back to the Patreon community. I'll keep my Patreon pitch short, but we have a Slack channel that you can meet other developers in there that are learning as well. I'm in the Slack channel communicating, but you get to vote on videos each week, what I make for the next week. So the Patreon community, yes, it is kind of like a donation where you pay a small amount. However, you're getting... My goal, anyway, is to give you much more value back than that small amount. So don't look at Patreon as just a donation. However, if all you want is just a donation, like I said, super chat here in the live stream is a good way to do it. So Neil, as a junior dev, do you still get really stuck in a project, or do you end up as the T-boy? I'm not sure what the T-boy is. Yeah, Neil, if you're still in here, if you can kind of expand on that question, I'll come back. So I'm not sure what you mean by stuck in a project. Or I'm not sure what you mean by that question, but I'm happy to answer if you can clarify that a little bit. Sanka says, are companies willing to conduct interviews online since I don't live in the U.S.? Yeah, they do online interviews all the time. I mean, obviously the political landscape in the U.S., which I'm not going to get into now with immigration and H-1Bs, might be getting a little tricky. I don't know much about that, but I mean, I know companies like Google, Facebook, they hire from all over the world and do remote interviews all the time. Okay, looks like Avar's got the video working on the iPad app. Not sure what's going on. Michael Harden says, what are some good resources for learning about algorithms? I do Cracking the Coding interview. That's my go-to. There's a YouTube channel called Hacker Rank that talks about data structures and algorithms and explains them very well. So between the Cracking the Coding interview book and that YouTube channel, and then there's Harvard CS50 has a YouTube channel too for basic data structures and algorithms. And between those three, you should definitely get the basics down. Please share your experience on online coding interviews like TopDollar or other companies, how it goes and how you should prepare. So yeah, the online coding interviews they're tricky because you don't know what they're going to ask. It's hard to prepare because like I mentioned earlier, those 1 hour phone screens, it's either 50% of the time it's CS and data structures and algorithms related, and the other 50% of the times it's iOS related, building something actually in iOS. So that is a 50-50 toss-up, so you don't even know which direction you're going, really. And then with the CS questions, I mean, it can be all kinds of different variations of a question. So I'm sorry, Avars, to give a vague answer. It's tough to actually prepare. I mean, I just practice as many problems, and I do the Cracking the Coding interview practice problems when I'm preparing. And then there's another site, HackerRank is another site where they do coding questions. So really it's just practicing a bunch of problems, because at the end of the day, all the problems are variations of each other. So yes, you might not see the exact same problem, but you'll most likely, if you've done a lot of practice problems, you'll have done similar problems to that. So yeah, just practice a crap ton is basically all I would say. And they're tricky because you only get a half hour to 40 minutes to complete this problem, and you got somebody virtually watching over your shoulder, they're watching you as you type, they're asking you questions. So it's not your normal working environment. So it's always pretty, nerve-wracking. You don't, and you always feel bad about looking at Stack Overflow because that kind of has a bad connotation sometimes. So it's weird. You're trying to do, at least me, I'm just speaking from my experience. I'm trying to do, and this is why anytime I mess up in those interviews, it's because I'm trying to do too much off the top of my head and not really diving into, the documentation or the, resources. I'm trying to prove that I know this off the top of my head, which is probably a mistake. I wouldn't do that, but yeah, they're stressful. It's hard to prepare for them. I'm not going to act like they're easy. What's going on, guys? Sorry, just catching up some questions. Have you applied for jobs without recruiters contacting you? What is best for resumes? Yeah, so very rarely. So I think you mean by just going to, Yelp.com, going to careers and hitting apply and submitting your resume. That is, I'm not saying that's impossible, but that is probably the way you're going to have the least amount of success. Either if a recruiter reaches out to you, you're automatically going to get the recruiter call and into the flow. That's pretty much guaranteed. Or if you get to know some of the developers. So like I mentioned, having an online presence and getting involved in the community, start following developers from some of the companies you want to work for. They're all on Twitter, tweeting about stuff. So if you want to work at Facebook, you can find a bunch of Facebook developers and start interacting with them over time, build a relationship, and then that's a good way to get in, after you've been talking to them for a couple months and they know who you are. Say, hey, do you mind passing on my resume to a recruiter? And you're pretty much always going to get the recruiter call that way. So I don't recommend, I call it going in through the front door, which is just going to the website, applying and sending in your resume blindly. Like I said, I'm not saying that's impossible, but that is probably the least way, to success. Can you give one example of a whiteboard question? Off the top of my head, I probably wouldn't know all the details, because usually they're pretty detailed in like 5 or 6 steps. Like, okay, do this, then this, and this, and this. So I kind of know the gist of them on the top of my head, but I think I'd confuse you more than help you if I tried to describe it right now. However, that might be a good idea for a video. I can probably just do like I have a whiteboard here. Just actually do a whiteboard question that I got. But an example of it, if you look on my videos on my channel, I start doing the coding challenge, interview coding challenge videos that has like the 2-sum problem, merge sort, and binary search. Those are some good examples of whiteboard problems. However, I just did them in Xcode on the computer. But if you just look at those questions and what they're asking you to solve, that's a good example of a whiteboard question. Reed says, not sure if you can answer this, but based on job listings you've seen, what city do you think is best to apply in around on the East Coast, not including New York City? Well, the answer was going to be New York City. So if there's certain tech hubs in the United States. I know Boston is one, like Highway 128, I think is what they call it. I could be very wrong on that. Somebody will correct me. And then there's the Research Triangle down in North Carolina, like Durham, Raleigh, that area. So New York City, Boston, and then the Research Triangle are the big ones on the East Coast. And again, the Research Triangle is in North Carolina, Boston, and then New York City. So those are like the major tech hubs on the East Coast. Sorry, I'm going to mispronounce this name. Abdikatir. Would you ever create a dev studio? Probably not. It's just a lot of work. Like I said, the worst thing about contracting is finding the work and finding the clients and dealing with the clients, getting payment from the clients, all that stuff. That's why I like working for a dev studio, because I don't have to deal with that. They just give me work and I just work. So probably not, because like I said, when you run a dev studio, your sole job is to find the clients, and that's the part I don't like at all. So probably not. How to apply in U.S. companies? Are there any good consultancy agencies? Well, there's tons of development agencies around. You just have to Google. There's literally hundreds of dev shops and dev studios. So yeah, you just have to Google that. And they do work remotely. Like, so for example, the dev shop that I'm working for is out of Dallas, and here I am in San Francisco. So they don't really care where you live. Ade says, what is more important for employees, design patterns, algorithms, and data structures, or knowing iOS development frameworks, SDK, and coding languages in Swift? That's all important. What you actually use on a day-to-day is the iOS stuff, the frameworks, the algorithms and data structures. The honest truth is, yes, you can use them every once in a while for, in your iOS development, but for the most part, you're not going to use data structures and algorithms in your day-to-day iOS development. So I would say if you're looking for one thing to focus on the iOS development frameworks. However, a lot of times you need that data structures and algorithms to even get the job. So it's kind of a catch-22 there a little bit. What networking do you use like AF networking? That's not a job question, but it's simple. It's just Alamo Fire. Okay. Yeah, okay. Neil's coming back with his other question here about his British terminology. What I mean is, as a junior developer, do you get really involved in code a lot, or do you end up as a senior dev's assistants, like their intern, like grabbing them coffee or something? No, absolutely not. You're probably working more than they are, right? Because a lot of coding, is bug fixing. It's a lot of tedious tasks. So as the junior guy, they want to get you up to speed as possible. So yeah, you'll probably be writing code, more than them for the most part. So yeah, don't think that you're just going to be the intern fetching coffee all day. That's definitely not the case, Neil. Liam, thanks for the super chat. Appreciate it. Keep the videos coming. I'm a master at procrastinating. Your videos give me so much motivation to stop slacking. I procrastinate too. Even though I do think I get a lot done, I still feel like I'm leaving hours on the table, because I'll go down a YouTube rabbit hole on like cryptocurrencies or something stupid. So I definitely waste time too, but it's all in moderation. Ryan asks, what is the best way to find a job listing? Where do you look for a job? So the main ones I go to, at least here, and this is, I'm in the Silicon Valley market, so AngelList here is huge. That's where like a lot of the startups go to post jobs and look for talent. So it's just angellist.co, I believe. I don't think they're a .com. Angellist.co. Just Google AngelList and you'll find it. That's the number one. And then just incoming LinkedIn, and then the LinkedIn job page. But I'm to the point where I think you said how to find companies, or find a job listing. And this is just speaking for me and where I'm at, is like I'm now looking at the major companies here, and they're pretty much always hiring. So it's not a matter of like, oh, do you have an opening? Like I know they're hiring. I just got to apply and get my foot in the door there. So I think to answer your question, which I don't have a ton of experience with, at least recently, is just finding any company that has a listing. And it's like I said, it's super easy in Silicon Valley because there's 1,000 companies here and they're all looking for developers. So as a developer in Silicon Valley, like life is easy when it comes to that. If you're in a smaller town that's not a tech hub, that's probably difficult, and I understand that's difficult. However, it's hard for me to help because I don't know what that's like. Like I've never done that, so I can't really have good advice on how to help you there. Christian says, I'm in an interview process now, and I first had a coding challenge, a sit down with the iOS lead, which went well, and then was given another coding challenge. Do you think this is different than normal? Like I said at the beginning, every company does their interview process differently. What I'm talking about today is just the way the majority of them do them. That's kind of like the most common way. However, companies do their own thing to hire the best people. So I don't think that's abnormal. What probably happened, and I don't want to speak for him, but what probably happened, he talked to you, your initial coding challenge might have been okay, but not great. They talked to you, they liked you, and they're like, okay, let's give him a second shot at the coding challenge to try something to really impress us because we liked him. If you sat down with that iOS lead and they didn't like you and you were done, they wouldn't have given you the second coding challenge to continue on. So I would look at it as a good sign that they're keeping you in the process. But as far as if that's normal, like I said, every company does their own thing. Hi, if I know, Jude asked, iOS app development, is it possible to find a job in the USA without a degree? I would say yes, you just have to prove that you can do it. Because my degrees are in economics and finance, so I don't have a computer science degree, and I can find work no problem. So not having a computer science degree is not going to hold you back. Now, not having a degree in general, like you never went to college, I think that might hold you back a tiny bit, but it's certainly not a deal breaker. As long as you can prove that you can code, because like say you did go to college and you got a English degree, like that's probably, it may help a little bit, but it's probably not going to help you in computer science anyway. So as long as you can prove that you can code and you can build apps, you should be good to go. Anoop says, how much time on average do you spend studying Swift apart from doing development? Also, how frequent? Lately, not much. Because I've packed my schedule too much. Like I said, you guys know I have 45 hours a week of contracting work. And then I do this YouTube stuff. I do coaching on the side. So there's not a lot of time for learning. Now, don't get me wrong. I learn a lot and study Swift by doing my contract work because I get new projects every 3 to 4 weeks, and you learn by doing. So, I'll come across a feature. For example, in my latest app, I'm building a chatbot. Never built a chatbot before. So now I have to learn how to build a chatbot. So I learned Swift by actually in my on-the-job training, so to speak. It's not necessarily like, okay, let me sit down and study Swift for a little bit. So that's kind of how I do it. Gotta catch up here. Ben says, popping in to say hi. What's going on, Ben? Okay, looks like Rainer. I don't know what he's talking about. Okay, cryptocurrency. I don't know much about cryptocurrency. I just kind of started learning about it. You can't not hear about it here, at least in Silicon Valley. It's everywhere. How does someone get an interview with a major company? I kind of touched on this before. I think the best way is to start building relationships on Twitter and kind of like think of it as a long-term plan. Like don't just search for a Facebook developer and say, hey, pass on my resume and just spam them. That's not going to work. If you just start interacting with them on Twitter, start asking questions, get involved in their conversations, and do this over the course of like a couple months so they get to know you, and then ask, right? Like don't just come out of nowhere and ask for stuff. That's not going to work. I would say that's probably the best way. Like I said, going in through the front door, just going to their website and submitting your resume, has a very low probability of success. Knowing somebody and having them kind of pass on the resume, because a lot of these companies do referral bonuses, right? Like so if somebody refers me, if I know a Lyft developer and they refer me and then I end up getting hired, they get like a bonus of like a couple $1,000s. Every company has different levels. It could be $2,000, $5,000, $10,000, depending on how bad the company wants to hire people. So they'll gladly pass on your resume because there's incentive for them to do it. However, like I said, they're only going to do that if they know you a little bit, not just randomly spamming them. Sanket says, how much salary can a typical junior iOS dev expect in San Francisco? Is it going to be enough? You're probably going to have a roommate. I mean, it's probably not enough to have your own apartment if you want to live like in the city. If you want to live in Oakland or the East Bay, maybe that's different, even though that's getting expensive now. But typically, I mean, anywhere from, I mean, this is a wide range. I've heard of junior developers, from 70 to 120. I've heard of junior developers fresh out of boot camp getting 120, which I think is on the high end of the spectrum. But and then I've also seen them, 70, 80. So it's a pretty wide range. Wow, you got the pronunciation of my name spot on. That's shocking because I never do. How much time is it going to take if I've got a degree and done some Swift 3 and learning framework the last 20 days? It's certainly going to take longer than 20 days to become an iOS developer. If you saw my video, it took me 7 months from knowing nothing to doing a boot camp to getting hired at my first job. And I even think that was probably kind of fast. That's on the faster side than average. So yeah, if you've only been doing it for 20 days, you got a long way to go, but keep at it. I mean, don't get discouraged. Neil says, have you ever worked on an app you were not excited about? All the time. And did it change your motivation whilst working on it? Is it important to be bought into the app idea you feel? Yes and no. I mean, so like with contracting, I mentioned I don't get to pick my projects. I basically just get whatever work they do. So sometimes I'm not interested in it. And yes, that does kill motivation. Obviously, if you love the project, you're going to be so into it that it's not even going to feel like work. However, if you hate the project, hate's a strong word. If you're not interested in the project, it's going to be like a chore to do work on that. And sometimes my contract work is like that, where I'm like, oh, I got to do 5 hours on this project, and it does feel like a chore. However, that's pretty rare because I like development anyway. Like I said, I'm building a chatbot, and that's new to me. Even though the topic might not be interesting to me, the fact I'm building a chatbot is interesting to me. So yeah, it's you will deal with that. I don't know. You just gotta love what you do, though. Like if you don't love programming, then working on a project you don't like is gonna be brutal. So the love of the programming is what gets me through those projects I'm not interested in. Hey, what's going on, Andy? I missed the beginning of this video. You starting the interview process again? Not until beginning of 2018. So I'm gonna finish out contracting for 2017 because I'm pretty much committed to that on my current projects. So once those projects launch, I'm good to go. I am gonna make the rounds at the major companies again at 2018 because, like I said, I made the rounds in 2017, got my ass kicked, but I learned a lot. That was really my first time like officially interviewing for these big companies too. So it was a learning experience, and I'd only been an iOS developer for a year and a half. So to expect to only be a developer for a year and a half and then jump right to the big leagues, I don't mind that I got my ass kicked. Like that's fine. However, now that I know what it's like, and I've had a year to like kind of hone my skills and prepare, I'm pretty confident when I go back out in 2018. And I don't want to like get too confident and jinx myself, but I'm pretty confident when I go back out again at the beginning of the year, things will go well. I hope anyway. Brian says, hey Sean, thanks for doing the scheduled live streams. Question, how do you organize your contract details? Contingency after the project, additional feature costs, etc. Brian, that's really not a job question, but I already read it. So I'll keep it short. But basically the development agency I work for handles all that. Like I said, that's what's nice about working for an agency. You give up a little bit of your money because they have to make money off of you, but it's so convenient. You don't have to worry about all that stuff. You just code, which is what I want to do. Code and make YouTube videos and play basketball. Anoop says, a follow-up question. Do you think Apple Swift documentation is sufficient to crack interviews? I often find interviewers asking questions on third-party frameworks too. I've never been asked a question on a third-party framework. They ask if like I know how to use them, and I've used CocoaPods before, but nobody's asked me a specific question on like Alamo Fire, like how something works in Alamo Fire. So not sure how to answer that one. Again, okay, so I think people are coming in late. I'm trying to keep these questions to job-related stuff because I've gone over this a few times, but I'm only answering the job-related questions just to keep the stream focused because I've got feedback on the previous streams that they're too scattered. I answer the same questions over and over again, so try to keep the questions job-related. I haven't said that disclaimer in a while, so there might be a lot of new people in here. Are you involved in Meetup? And if so, have they been a good way to network and ultimately get job opportunities? So I go to Meetups all the time. I don't utilize them like I should. So this is an example of do as I say, not as I do. So when I go to Meetups, there's usually a talk, and I'm just there for the talk. I don't really talk to people. But yes, they are a great way to network. I mean, it's a room full of iOS developers working in the city that you work in. I mean, how is that not a great way to network? So I don't utilize it as much as I should, and I need to get better at it. But yeah, they are awesome. So if you have meetups in your area, absolutely go to them. Maybe even start one if there's not one in your area. How fair do you think it is for companies to expect you to know Swift and also know specific stuff that they're looking for rather than hire a dev and let them learn what's necessary? I mean, I don't know if fair is the right word. I mean, obviously people are looking to fill positions that people can come in and make an impact right away. I do think it's kind of funny because sometimes companies won't hire, and I've seen this on companies that turned me down because I was too junior. That was the biggest feedback I got, was like, you're just too junior, you're not there yet. We like you, you're just not there yet, which was true. Like I agreed with it. But anyway, it's kind of funny though that some of those same positions 6 months later are still open. Whereas it's like, okay, you know, you're trying to fill this position with a senior guy that's like impossible to find. However, had you hired somebody that wasn't quite there yet, and I'm not saying like hire me, I'm just speaking in general, you know, over the past 6 months, they could have got there, you know? So it's kind of funny that I'm still seeing the same job openings, you know, so that they haven't filled yet. And you know, it's like, well, if you would have filled it with somebody that was almost there, they would have been there by now and you would have gotten to train them and everything. So I don't know, it's kind of funny. All right, guys, got a couple more questions. I'm going to wrap it up. If you have any last second job questions, go ahead and get them in now. Probably going to go on for about a couple more minutes. I got to the end of the questions list. The last couple questions are not job related, so unless I get a job related question, I'll go ahead and answer those and then probably take off. But let me give you an update on mentoring real quick, since there's still a lot of people in here. I take 3 students on at a time. Currently, that's all full. Basically, what I do in the mentoring is it's a 1-hour Skype session one-on-one, and it's catered to what you want. Now, if you're working on a project and you're trying to launch it, I'll dive into that code base with you, fix bugs, get it ready, give you my opinion on what it takes to launch. Some of my students are preparing for the job search, so we're trying to get their portfolio app ready. That's what we're doing. Or if you're a beginner and you just want more one-on-one coaching, I go ahead and I have like some basic sample projects I can give you to build, and then we kind of go through that together. It's really catered to whatever you want. Again, I'm not going to pretend to be like a 10-year senior developer. Like I said, I have 2.5 years of experience. You guys kind of gotten to know me. So if you're just beginning and you want that mentorship, go ahead and hit me up. It does cost money. I want to be upfront about that. It's $70 an hour, but I do more than... it's $70 for that 1-hour session, but I do about an hour of prep work before that session where, like I said, I'm reviewing your code, or I usually have you send me what you want to talk about, and then I do the research on all those topics. So when we are talking for that hour, it's just 60 minutes of straight value, right? We're not wasting time looking stuff up. So if you're interested in that, let me know. Hit me up on Twitter DM or email. The email's on the YouTube channel. Again, I take on 3 students at a time. I'm full for the moment, but like I say, I sell packages of 3, so those packages are going to be done soon, so I am going to have openings soon. So if you'd like to get on the waiting list, go ahead and email me or Twitter DM. All right, going to catch up on some last second questions and then wrap it up here. Okay, well actually this is talking about C++, which I know nothing about. Avar says, is mentoring is okay for training for interviews? Yeah, like I said, I have a lot of experience in what you get asked in interviews, and like I said, and that's what I'm trying to do with my interview question series on my channel. I'm trying to make that so anybody that's preparing for an interview can just burn through that series, and then they hopefully should be good to go, at least for like a junior interview. Now, if you're interviewing for a iOS lead position, maybe not, but all right, looks like I'm at the end of the questions list. Thank you guys for coming. We will see you guys next week. Like I said, next week I'm going to try and spice it up with maybe some live coding, or I don't know, something different than a Q&A, because I'm trying to keep these fresh. So the Twitter handle is @SeanA0400. All right, guys, see ya.